For too long, people have been suffering from some form of political aggression. That must be reduced now, today, as we have gone so far in political process. In our Western democratic world, less people are suffering from injustice or structural violation. But can you imagine that you live under one of these despotic political structures? Those of you that have such experience already know what I'm talking about. You feel a sense of pressure, a political pressure that affects every aspect of your life and your profession. You cannot write an article freely. You cannot express and talk your idea out. You cannot do business in a free or relative free market. You cannot even enjoy or have fun with your family, friends, or your love. You are entitled to nothing. Today, I'm gonna talk about political aggression, its legitimacy, and how we can distinguish it from the illegitimate one, such as violation. Some may think that the question about aggression is related to the nature of psychology, the great suspicion that I had at the beginning of my research. Yet, it is not only about a pure psychological path, it has also its political roots. In the past years, many of us have seen, heard, or engaged in political debates, which probably most of them is related to what is happening in Middle East, Africa, or Asia under such oppressive regimes. So I got to tell you that all of you have kind of talked and discussed about this subject over and over again. Look at these marked countries. Each of them is representing unique practical structure of autocracies in which the political aggression is the major trend. The main instrument of all authoritative regimes is violation, which can be considered under a wider group of political aggression. That is why political aggression theory is important, because it is the main instrument of each political structure and it is highly contentious when we are considering authoritative regimes. First, we have to see what act of aggression is. Is it always related to psychology or it is pure political matter? And then we have to see that how it would be linked on the one hand to human rights and on the other hand to political anxiety theory and political consciousness theory. Psychological explanation of aggression has been always a dominant assumption. Among all, we can refer to the frustration-aggression hypothesis, which merely concentrates on a strong connection between the act of aggression and the personal social context. Basically, the common and simple idea is that the frustration is the only origin of all acts of aggression. It is fair though, the relation between frustration and aggression is pretty strong, yet they cannot completely assess our understanding regarding the act of aggression in politics. This means that a psychological definition of frustration is not the only origin of act of aggression in political cases. So to understand the origin of political act of aggression, we have to understand political consciousness theory. Political consciousness basically is a mutual recognition of right and power between authority or government and those who are governed, more or less is based on a rational normative principle through the process of governance. Given the historical process, the political consciousness is the fundamental trait of political progress and political revolutions, such as Glorious Revolution of 1688, French Revolution of 1799, American Revolution of 1783, and Arab Spring in the recent years. In all of these instances, the revision in distribution of political power is the key point of revolutionary act for establishing the new political order. This process is the product of politicization toward political consciousness. Let us get back to political aggression and see how this political consciousness and political aggression has been connected to each other. There are two sources of aggression. Disappointment, which is raised for correction and justice, and avarice, which is raised for violation. But what have been said is frustration is not the only origin of act of aggression, which is rooted in inability and anxiety. In fact, aggression has been always a coercive instrument for political powers. Act of aggression can be raised from ill character of oppressed and oppressor or from the rule of law. What is important is that the rule of law should rely on a rational normative principle for an emotionless and legitimate act of aggression. In this sense, law is the mean for political power. With this concept, we can easily differentiate between aggression and violation, and that shows the legitimacy and illegitimacy of the act. While legitimate aggression is based on rational normative principle, violation is the illegitimate one which lacks such a ground. Thus, I would divide aggression to legitimate and illegitimate, and call violation a legitimate act of aggression which is against the human life and human rights. Now, if you are thinking that the usage of violation can be even worse, yes, there is. Because repetition in violation unavoidably cause a historical process act of oppression. While ago, we have talked about the act of aggression in politics, which on the one hand would be stand in front of the frustration-aggression hypothesis, and on the other hand related to the political consciousness theory, and that is anxiety. So let me explain it. Coercion and oppression have been always used by political powers. Both cause a sense of anxiety for those who exercise political power and for those who are subjected to it. Through the act of coercion, which is supported by law and rational normative principles, there has been always a sense of anxiety, but it is pretty low. On the other hand, an illegitimate act of aggression, which is based on ill character or avarice, there is a high sense of anxiety, and that is because of its origin and its illegitimacy. Among the illegitimate act of aggression is oppression. There are two forms to approach this concept. On the one hand, there is oppression as avarice aggression, which means this power continually keep using the authority to dominate and abuse its subject. And on the other hand, there is oppressor, which causes slavery and gender inequality in Middle Eastern countries, are the instance. So political anxiety is one of the factors or signs in behavioral political analysis that we can say if a political power is legitimate or illegitimate. What is that is basically depend on our understanding and differentiating between psychological definition of anxiety and the political definition of it. The political anxiety has been always accompanied by the fear of preservation, and it is more tangible within the behavior of authorities, and by fear of individual from the structure of violence. Why an authority should have political anxiety? Well, a simple answer to that is due to the nature of political power. An ongoing rivalry of justification for legitimacy or ongoing struggle of preservation for authoritative political power is the main cause of political anxiety. So we can merge this idea of a different power structure and the power itself. De facto political power is considered always with a high level of political consciousness. Look at these two bar charts. The gray color is representing non-authoritative regime and the red one is representing authoritative regimes. Now imagine there is a high level of political consciousness in authoritative regimes. Then there would be a high level of anxiety in the power relations. Self-consciousness of political power and of its illegitimacy simultaneously produce a high level of anxiety for the sake of its own preservation. Then they use power out of the border of rational normative legitimacy, human rights, and equality would be not important. The practice of political power under the anxiety is a legitimate act of aggression. Here, we can see that in authoritative regimes, the political consciousness and political anxiety have an equal ratio. That is why they use high level of oppression. In contrary, a high level of political consciousness is component of democratic regimes. It is not threat to them. So there is a low level of anxiety and a low level of aggression. Thus, in democratic regime or non-authoritative regimes, the political consciousness and political anxiety have opposite ratio. In this sense, there is a direct link between political consciousness, political anxiety, and political power. Now let us take a quick look at the lower chart. Accordingly, when there is a high level of political consciousness, a high level of oppression, the consent of people to such power structure would be pretty low. Now, without the consent or belief of the citizens, a legitimate political power has no other instrument to be preserved other than a legitimate act of aggression. Here, both anxiety and frustration rooted in political preservation. Now, I can clearly say that the frustration-aggression hypothesis would be partially worked, but it is not sufficient. In a political-oriented aspect, I have a substitute concept of anxiety-aggression hypothesis. So the illegitimate state have a high level of anxiety and the use of illegitimate act of aggression as their instrument for all purposes. But what the authoritative state do is to use the illegitimate act of aggression to justify the political power. In other words, what these authoritative regimes do is to force their subjects to their justification of power. They are violating the rights of their citizens and oppressing their subjects every day. The claim to the legitimacy through the oppressive-oriented justification is a pure oppression and negated based on political consciousness theory. This is what I call as fallacy of legitimization. They use the fallacy of legitimization to justify the regime, so they violate human rights. In a big picture, there are three forms of violation. Direct act of violation like murder, injuries, and war. Indirect act of violation like discrimination, violation of liberty. More complex is the combination of direct and indirect violation, such as all oppressive regimes, or even a terrorist group such as ISIL are representative of such form. The trend against the fallacy of legitimization and any illegitimate act of aggression is legitimate act of aggression. It is aggression since it is the act of correction, and it is legitimate because it is against the fallacy of legitimization. It is backed up with a rational normative ground, and in most of the cases, it is accompanied with collective consent. Aim of a legitimate act of aggression is applying a minimum level of justice in a world which is based on rational normative principle, preserving human rights and dignity, and to establish and securing peace. Now, what about ISIL, the Ebola of people? ISIL as a terrorist group finds its foothold in some part of Iraq, Syria, and Africa. Its existence and practice of power is illegitimate, and its counterattack would be a legitimate act of aggression. As Pope Francis said, stopping the unjust aggressor is legitimate. One important and final point is that the direct and indirect legitimate act of aggression against act of oppression can be appealed through ratification of law and regulating economic policies both within a nation, but mostly more effective when it is applied by international authorities. The effectiveness of direct and indirect act of aggression should be based on its hegemonic consensus, collective democratic values, and political consciousness basis, which manifests itself in the actualization of capacity for justice and international norms, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. However, at the end, I would like to express a wish, and that is I hope one day, by working together, we won't anymore need to analyze such subjects, and we live in a pure, secure, peaceful world. That if there is any act of aggression, only be legitimate and be at the lowest level. Thank you all for your attention.